The air inside the courtroom was suffocating, not because of the heat, the AC was blasting, but because of the weight of it all. The kind of weight that pressed against a man's chest, made his hands clench into fists, made his breath feel like it wasn't his own. Chief Petty Officer Logan Brooks sat in the defendant's chair, hands shackled in front of him, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit that felt like a goddamn insult to the uniform he had worn for over 15 years. He had been shot at, hunted, buried alive, and left for dead in war zones most people didn't even know existed. But right now, this courtroom felt more dangerous than any battlefield. The jury had already filed back in. The judge sat stone-faced. The room held its breath. This was it. The bailiff stood and cleared his throat. In the matter of the United States versus Chief Petty Officer Logan Brooks, how does the jury find the defendant? A man in a cheap suit and a too-tight tie stood up, paper trembling in his hands. He didn't meet Logan's eyes. Guilty! The word hit like a bullet. It didn't matter that Logan had known this was coming. It didn't matter that he had told himself to be ready. Hearing it still made his stomach turn cold. Murmurs filled the courtroom. Some people nodded like they'd expected it. Others, like Logan's lawyer, just sighed in defeat. The judge lifted his gavel. Chief Petty Officer Logan Brooks, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Captain Jason Mills. The gavel slammed down. It was over. Logan stared at the wooden table in front of him, breathing slow, steady. He had spent 5 years behind bars for a murder he didn't commit. They had called it an execution, claimed he had shot Captain Mills in cold blood during a classified mission in the Middle East. The evidence was stacked against him, gunshot residue on his hands, a missing bullet from his service pistol, and worst of all, a witness who swore Logan was the last person to see Mills alive. It didn't matter that none of it made sense. It didn't matter that Mills had been like a brother to him. It didn't matter that someone had gone out of their way to erase the real killer. The system had chosen a scapegoat, and now he was paying for it. Chief Brooks, the judge said, tone neutral, already done with him. You have been sentenced to life. Before this court is adjourned, do you have anything to say? Logan lifted his head, staring at the man who had just ripped his future away. His lawyer leaned in. Logan, don't. But Logan ignored him. He turned to the judge. Yes, sir, he said, voice calm, steady. I have one last request. The courtroom went still. The judge raised an eyebrow. Go on. Logan swallowed. I want to see my K9 partner, he said. One last time. The courtroom murmured. A few people exchanged glances. The prosecutor, a smug, well-dressed snake of a man, chuckled under his breath. You want to see your dog? He said, leaning forward. Is that it? Some kind of sentimental plea for sympathy? Logan didn't blink. I trained him. I raised him. I owe him a goodbye. The prosecutor scoffed, turning to the judge. Your Honor, this is absurd. Military K9s are reassigned after their handlers are discharged. His dog is government property, not some... The judge held up a hand to silence him, and then, after a moment of hesitation, he nodded. I'll allow it. The next day, Logan sat in the visitation room, hands cuffed to the table. He had barely slept, not because of fear, not because of the reality that he'd be spending the rest of his life in a 6x8-foot cell. Number. Because he was about to see Odin, his K9 partner, his war dog, his only real brother, left. The metal door opened, and there he was. Odin, bigger than Logan remembered, more muscle, the same sharp amber eyes. But something was different. The moment the massive Belgian Malinois stepped into the room, his body tensed. Logan had prepared himself for this, for the possibility that Odin wouldn't remember him, that he'd be just another face in a room full of strangers. But Odin froze. His ears twitched. His entire body locked onto Logan. Then, for the first time in his life, Odin disobeyed a direct order. The new handler barely had time to react before Odin ripped free from the leash, barreling toward Logan. A whimper, sharp, desperate, echoed through the room. Then, 90 pounds of war dog crashed into Logan's chest, nearly knocking him over. The guards moved in. Control your dog! Someone barked, but Odin wasn't attacking. He was whining, pressing his head into Logan's chest, licking his face, pawing at him like a soldier reunited with his lost unit. Logan gritted his teeth, gripping the dog's fur, holding on like Odin was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "You remember," Logan whispered, voice hoarse. Odin pressed harder into him. It was not the reaction of a dog greeting a stranger. It was the reaction of a soldier recognizing his brother. And everyone in the room knew it. The judge sat behind the glass, arms crossed. His expression had changed. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The handler, a young lieutenant, was pale. I don't understand," he stammered. "Odin's never done this before." The judge's voice was calm, cold. "Tell me, Lieutenant," he said, eyes locked on the scene in front of him. "When was the last time you saw Odin react to someone like that?" The handler swallowed. "Never." Silence. Then Logan broke it. "He knows," Logan said, his voice dangerously low. The room turned to him. Logan held Odin tighter, his mind racing. Odin remembered him. That wasn't surprising. But the way he reacted, like he had just found something that had been stolen from him, meant one thing. Odin didn't just remember Logan. He remembered the night of the murder. And if Logan was right, Odin had seen the real killer. The visitation room was silent, the air thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. Odin was still pressed against Logan, his massive frame trembling, his whines low and guttural, full of something deeper than just reunion. He was remembering. The guards didn't move. The handler stood frozen, eyes wide, his grip on the leash long forgotten. And across the glass, in the courtroom viewing area, the judge watched with a frown. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable, like he was seeing something he wasn't supposed to. Logan knew what they were all thinking. Military K-9 don't act like this. Not after being separated for years. Not when reassigned. Not unless something was wrong. Something very wrong. The handler cleared his throat. I don't know what's going on," he muttered. "Odin's never acted like this before." Logan's jaw clenched, because he knew exactly what was happening. Odin wasn't just recognizing him. Odin was reacting to the past, to the night of the murder. And Logan knew, with absolute certainty, Odin had seen the real killer. The judge tapped his fingers against the armrest of his chair, watching intently. His expression wasn't neutral anymore. He was thinking, analyzing. The prosecutor cleared his throat, forcing a smirk. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is nothing but a dog's emotional response. We don't conduct legal proceedings based on canine behavior." Logan gritted his teeth, stroking Odin's fur, his mind racing. "You don't get it," Logan said, his voice sharp. "This isn't just emotion. This is training. This is memory." The prosecutor scoffed. "So now you're saying the dog remembers the night of the murder?" Logan looked up, eyes hard as steel. "Yes." Silence. The judge exhaled, rubbing his temple. "All right, let's say, hypothetically, we entertain this." He turned to the handler. "Lieutenant, what do we know about Odin's behavior since the incident?" The young handler stiffened. "Well, he hesitated. "Speak freely, Lieutenant," the judge ordered. The handler swallowed hard. "Sir, Odin's been through 4 handlers since Chief Brooks's arrest," he admitted, "and he's rejected every single one." The prosecutor visibly stiffened. The judge raised a brow. "Rejected?" The handler nodded. "Yes, sir. He follows commands, but he's never formed a bond. He doesn't trust easily, never wags his tail, never relaxes. It's like..." His eyes flickered to Odin, still glued to Logan's side. "It's like he's been waiting for something." The courtroom shifted. The judge sat back, his eyes calculating now. And yet, here he is, reacting to Brooks like he never left. The handler hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Logan let out a slow breath. Odin didn't just recognize me. He remembered the last time he saw me. He remembered that night. The judge's gaze snapped to the prosecutor. "Why wasn't this brought up in the trial?" The prosecutor looked visibly rattled now. "Because it's irrelevant." "Is it?" Logan's lawyer finally spoke, stepping forward. "Your Honor, I'd like to request access to Odin's body cam footage from the night of the murder. If the dog remembers what happened, maybe we can prove what he saw." Logan's heart pounded. Yes. This was it. The body cam. The one piece of evidence they had never allowed him access to. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "That footage was corrupted. There's nothing there." "Then you shouldn't have a problem letting us look at it," Logan's lawyer shot back. The prosecutor's face turned red. And that's when Logan knew. The footage wasn't missing. It had been covered up. The courtroom recessed for 2 hours while the military scrambled to find the deleted footage. Logan sat in a holding cell, staring at the wall, barely breathing. This was it. The moment they uncovered the real truth. Then, the guards returned. "Get up, Brooks," one of them muttered, almost uneasy. "Judge wants you back in the courtroom." Logan stood without a word. As soon as he entered the room, he felt the change. The air was different. The judge sat stiffly, his face hard, unreadable. The prosecution, the lead attorney, looked pale, his hands clutching the table like his world had just caved in. And Odin? Odin was still at Logan's side, waiting. The judge adjusted his glasses, then turned to Logan's lawyer. "You were right," he said, his voice flat, cold. The footage was never corrupted. It was erased, deliberately. Logan's fists clenched. The room shifted. The press in the gallery started whispering. The jury exchanged glances. "What's on the tape?" Logan asked. His voice was low, dangerous. The judge nodded toward the screen. "See for yourself." A grainy black and white recording flickered to life. Odin's body cam footage. The night Captain Mills was murdered. The timestamp read 0103 hours. Deserted base, low visibility. Odin's breathing filled the audio, heavy but controlled. Then, voices. 2 men arguing. Captain Mills's voice, agitated, angry, and another voice, one that Logan recognized instantly. Lieutenant Greg Harrison. "Mills, you think I don't know what you're doing? Selling classified intel? You think I won't report you?" Harrison. "You're not reporting anything." Then, a gunshot. Mills collapsed. Odin barked, lunging forward. Harrison whirled around, gun still smoking, his face clear as day on the camera. "Shit," Harrison muttered on the tape. "They're gonna blame Brooks for this." Then, static. The footage cut out. The video ended, leaving the courtroom in absolute chaos. Murmurs turned to shouts, reporters scrambling, jury members wide-eyed, the prosecutor looking like a man watching his career burn to the ground. And Logan, he just sat there, breathing, processing. After 5 years, after losing everything, the truth had finally come out. The judge slammed his gavel. "Lieutenant Greg Harrison, you are under immediate investigation for the murder of Captain Mills and the obstruction of justice in Chief Petty Officer Brooks' conviction." A pair of MPs stormed into the room, grabbing Harrison, who had turned ghost white. "You can't," he started, but it was too late. Justice had finally arrived. The courtroom was in chaos. Logan Brooks sat motionless, the weight of the last 5 years pressing down on him like a storm. The truth was out. The real murderer, Lieutenant Greg Harrison, had just been hauled out in cuffs, his face pale, his stammered protests ignored. The judge banged the gavel, trying to restore order. The reporters in the gallery were already on their phones, breaking the story in real time. But Logan wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Odin, the dog that had saved his life in war, the dog that had never forgotten him, even after 5 years apart, the dog that had just exposed the biggest cover-up in his entire career. And now, they were still threatening to take him away. The judge adjusted his glasses, his face tight. Given the overwhelming new evidence presented in this court today, Chief Petty Officer Logan Brooks' conviction is hereby overturned. The courtroom erupted. His lawyer clapped him on the back, reporters yelled over one another, and military officials at the back exchanged hushed whispers. But Logan didn't smile. He was free. But Odin wasn't, and he knew exactly what came next. The second the court was adjourned, Logan was led to a private holding area where his lawyer was already waiting. "We have a problem," she said, arms crossed. Logan exhaled. "Let me guess." She nodded. "They're not going to let you keep Odin." Logan's jaw clenched. He already knew the military had rules. K9s were considered property of the government, and only in rare cases were they retired to their handlers. But after what Odin had just done, they weren't going to let him go. "He's still considered an active military asset," she continued. "They want to reassign him, probably ship him off to another handler." The thought made Logan's stomach turn. Odin had waited 5 years for him, and now, after everything, they wanted to rip him away again. "Who's calling the shots?" Logan asked, voice tight. She exhaled. Brigadier General Marcus Holloway. Logan's hands curled into fists. Holloway, the same man who had signed off on his conviction, the same man who had stood by while they buried the real evidence. And now, he was trying to erase the last piece of Logan's life that mattered. Not a chance. Logan stood, rolling his shoulders. Where is he? Logan stormed into the military review office, Odin at his side. Brigadier General Marcus Holloway stood by the window, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. You're making a mistake, Brooks, Holloway said, his voice clipped. Logan didn't blink. You've already made enough of those for both of us. Holloway turned, stepping toward his desk. Let's be clear, the fact that you were exonerated doesn't change the fact that Odin is still military property. He's not a piece of equipment, Logan growled. He's a soldier. Holloway's face hardened. I understand the bond you two share. No, Logan cut him off. You don't, because if you did, you wouldn't be having this conversation. Odin sat tense beside Logan, his eyes locked on Holloway, his body language sharp, alert. Holloway sighed, rubbing his temple. Look, I get it. You think I'm the villain here. But there are rules, Brooks. Rules that don't change just because a dog likes you. Logan stepped forward, his voice low, lethal. This dog, he said, pointing down at Odin, just solved the case your team buried. He exposed the real killer. He's the only reason I'm not rotting in a cell right now. And after everything, you're really going to tell me he's just another piece of gear? Holloway didn't answer. Logan's fists clenched. You were fine letting me rot, but I'll be damned if I let you put Odin back in a cage. Holloway's eyes flickered toward Odin, the dog that had just taken down an entire conspiracy with nothing but loyalty and memory. He sighed heavily. You're going to make my life hell for this, aren't you? Logan smirked. Absolutely. Holloway closed his eyes for a second, then exhaled sharply. Fine. Logan's chest tightened. Fine? Holloway looked up. Odin is yours, effective immediately. Logan felt his entire body loosen. He looked down at Odin, who wagged his tail just once. Let's go home, boy. A week later, Logan stood on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, the wind salty, fresh, full of promise. Odin sat beside him, staring ahead, his posture relaxed, for the first time in years. Logan ran a hand over the dog's fur, feeling the familiar weight of his closest brother in arms. You waited for me? Logan muttered. Odin whined softly, nudging Logan's side. Yeah, I missed you too. The waves crashed below, the world stretched out ahead, and for the first time in years, Logan felt truly free.